So, should you write in first or third person? It's quite a difficult question, especially one if you'd have no idea what that even means, or what the strengths and limitations of each perspective is. So in this episode of Indie Opinions, I'm going to run through the basics of first and third person, what's good about them, and what their limitations are. And I'm also going to briefly touch on the second person's perspective, and give you an insight on what that is and when that can be used. So I feel like I should start, first of all, with first person. Now, first person is the perspective that I mostly write in. For almost every single story I have ever done, I have written in first person. And the reason as to why I have done this is mostly because I find the inherent strength of first person perspective stories to be very useful to me, in the sense that they give me the chance to get inside a character's head and give me a clear indication of what their motivations are, what they want out of the story, what they want out of their character arc, what they don't want out of their character arc in some instances, and it gives me a clear line of what I should do with the story. So that's one of the advantages of first person. Another advantage is it's a lot more personal. So you can superimpose characters onto yourself in a lot of senses. I do this quite a lot. Most of my characters that I've ever written have had some semblance to being like me. If it's just one character trait, if it's a couple of character traits, if it's, well, anything really. It could be anything from a tiny peculiar mannerism. But writing in first person is not the perfect way of writing. And it's certainly not a way you should write if you want to get the perspective of many different characters at once. Not unless you plan on writing from multiple characters' perspectives all in first person. But I wouldn't recommend doing more than 2 or 3 characters in this style, as otherwise it gets incredibly confusing, and it can be difficult for your reader to understand what the hell is going on. So in terms of the limitations of first person, it's limited to what other characters feel. For example, you couldn't say the friend character felt bad because your protagonist doesn't know how they felt. Sure, they can infer that they felt bad, but they don't know for certain that they actually did feel bad. If you understand what I mean, it's more about how they interact with the world, and the own character's opinions and backstory is formed from that. So that's another strength. And that's first person. So now I'm going to talk to you about third person. Now I'm going to be honest with you. Third person is not something I'm very used to writing in. I've barely scratched the surface of third person, but to be perfectly honest, I've written in it once, converting from a first person story I've already written into a third person screenplay, but it's not easy for me. But third person is useful for the exact opposite reasons of what I just stated for first person. It's useful in the sense that if you write in third person, you can give an outsider's perspective, an objective perspective on what's happening, because you are the narrator. You are telling the story through the narrator's eyes, not one character's eyes, but an all-seeing, all-knowing God almost, or godlike deity that knows everything about every character and how all of them feel, and how all of them interact with the world, all of their backstories. So for first person, for example, if another character has a strong backstory but it's not a character you write from the perspective of, you would need to get that out through dialogue or through reading in a diary or something, but you can't really get it from plain text, because otherwise the reader will be like, hang on a minute, that doesn't make any sense. How did they know? How did the protagonist know this? because they wouldn't. But limitation of third person, at least in my mind, is it's incredibly impersonal. Like, sure, you're looking at the perspective of many different characters, but if you want to hone in on one character, I find it very difficult to do that when reading in third person, or when writing in third person. Because for me, it just seems like you're just another character. How are you important? Sure, I get how you're important in the story, but your importance in terms of to me personally, as the reader, I don't understand it. I have a harder time understanding it. But that's just because of me, because I have a lack of empathy in some senses. But with first person, it's very like, for example, the friend character dies. You're like, you know that you should feel bad about that because, oh, the character I'm reading from the perspective of loves that character. That's really shit. So if you get what I mean. But like, in conclusion, I'd say writing in first person is very useful if you want to be more focused on what's happening. Like, it's quite good for, well, obviously for autobiographical stuff and biographical stuff, it's very good to write in first person because it gives the impression, like in a diary entry or something, just about the entire book. So if you want your book to be very personal, I'd recommend writing in first person. But if you want it to have a large cast of characters and make it easier for people to keep up with that cast of characters, like a very long high fantasy, such as the Game of Thrones series, I would recommend writing in third person. But those aren't the only two persons. I've only talked about first and third. The final perspective I want to talk about is second person. Now, second person isn't something you see all that much, especially not in books. Because, to be honest, I didn't even really know too much about second person up until relatively recently. But second person is where you make the reader themselves the protagonist. So you walk down the hall, you see a bright light, etc., etc., which is used quite a lot in story-based video games. But in terms of actual writing, I personally wouldn't recommend it. To me, it seems incredibly difficult to pull off, but that's just me. And that's all I've got to say about this, but I'm not the only person who spoke about this. A few weeks ago on my Twitter, I asked members of the writing community to give me their opinions on this, on what point of view they write in, and why. And I'm going to read them out to you. At King Jastaroth says, I prefer to write in third person, past tense limited, likely because all of my favourite books growing up were written the same. At Conductor Pat says, I usually write in third person. It's what I'm most comfortable with. I don't think I've tried writing in first person, come to think of it. And at Lottie_writing puts first person, she writes in first person, because I love getting inside a character's head. So for much the same reasons as I said, why I like writing in first person. So that's it for this episode. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.